Hey, I'm Juniper Nichols, and I am going to be putting on some makeup to transform into a version of the Morrigan. So this inspiration was originally comic book based. It's from The Wicked and the Divine, which is written by Kieran Gillen and illustrated by Jamie McKelvey. So this is one of my favorite comics. It is all about this pantheon that reemerges cyclically, like every 75-ish years. So the premise is that these young people become avatars of different deities from cultures all around the world. And they are essentially treated like pop stars. They do pop star performances, in fact, they sing, but they only have 2 years to live. So their purpose is to inspire humanity. Of course, there's many twists and turns in this story. And the goddess who really stood out to me is the Morrigan, as depicted here. This is obviously a creative version. She has cheek piercings. She has this black band across her eyes, which has nothing to do with Irish lore. But she has various aspects. This is the Bive. It looks like B-A-D-B, pronounced Bive. This is her most warlike aspect here. She is a goddess of war and death and prophecy. She has visions of the future, which she shares as the washer at the ford in mythology. And her third aspect in this comic is called Gentle Annie. And you see they all have different facial markings. Hers is just like this vertical rectangle, and the Bive has just these sort of big wing-like shading around her eyes. So that was all before October 7th happened, and we were suddenly plunged into a great deal of death and what is being termed a war, even though I would argue that it's too unequal in power to be really termed a war. Nonetheless, that is the sort of energy we're all dealing with right now. Now, a couple weeks ago, I just woke up at 3 a.m. and I couldn't stop thinking about Gaza and all the victims. Yes, the Israeli victims are very important, and I will not ignore that. I, of course, don't condone any of the deaths that have happened. But of course, that's very easy for me to say from the safety of my own home, the safety of my own body. I have no idea what kind of choices I would make in that situation, but yeah, I think I would probably go pretty feral if anyone was threatening my kids. So the question is, how do we deal with this cycle of violence? So I started to take this character very seriously. I was no longer comfortable with the music I had initially chosen. I started learning about the Morrigan from the Irish Pagan School online, which is led primarily by Laura O'Brien, who is a current day priest of the Morrigan, and she has a lot of great educational content. So I am going to use her instructions for dedicating a space to the Morrigan before I start putting on her face. So today is Halloween in the Southern Hemisphere. I'm in New Zealand. It shouldn't really be Samhain season right now because it's spring, but I celebrate when my family celebrates. I grew up with the tradition of it being on October 31st, so that's what I'm doing. Samhain, incidentally, is the entire month of November, or it can be celebrated dark moon to dark moon. And when I looked it up, the dark moon is the night I woke up and couldn't stop thinking about this. So I am not a spiritual person. I don't take omens or portents or anything like that, but if I'm going to do something witchy, I'm going to do it right. So we're starting with laying down a red cloth on my space. I am placing a feather from my costume. And this is a purple tiny little bud vase that I gave to my grandmother Felicity. She's one of the sources of my Irish heritage. The family legend has to do with an Irish elite of some sort marrying an English lady against the wishes of both families. And the story goes that when he died, she was left with some children and no family to take her in, so she moved to the States. That's all I know about that. Next, I'm going to place this clear rock crystal in my grandmother's tea light holder, which is amethyst colored. So these are two stones that could appropriately be used in connection with the Morrigan. They're not super highly associated or necessary, but there are native deposits around Ireland. It's for clarity and vision. That's what I'm calling it. Next, we are going to put a little bit of water in this bowl. Ideally, this will be collected from outside, but I am just going to get it from my tap because it's better to take imperfect action than to wait for conditions to be perfect. Okay, water bowl. All right, fire. So I've got my crystal candle holders. I have a red candle and I have a black candle. These are the two colors most associated with the Morrigan. All right, I'm going to place these off to the sides. All right, just trying to center myself for taking on this protest dance, which I will be performing this weekend. All right, a little pause to gather my materials for the makeup. Okay, I'm going to start by getting all this hair out of the way. I guess I kind of felt like the Morrigan character was the one that looked the most like me, so that was maybe part of the draw. But yeah, she's also just, the character is quite interesting in the comics. She's a nerdy goth girl who does role playing before she is transformed into this avatar. So kind of identify with that too. And it also felt like picking something that is my technical heritage would be better. Sometimes as a colonizer, it feels like everything is a bit appropriative, but all you can do with that is try to actually get in touch with the real source material and be as respectful as you can. So we are going to start by putting on some primer. I don't actually like my primer all that much, but I haven't found anything better. This one kind of makes my skin sting. I'm wearing my black and red Tetris earrings from Bethlehem that my aunt brought back to me. I haven't been to the Middle East myself. I would love to. Okay, here goes the primer. So I know that this feels like a very complicated subject, and oh, I gotta let my kitty in. Meow. Yeah, it can feel very paralyzing to feel like you don't know enough of the history to speak out. Nonetheless, it does seem like people are becoming really engaged right now because we're seeing so much death against a captive population. And I think that feels just obviously wrong to a lot of people. And I don't think that quibbling over who started it is very useful when there's ongoing slaughter. Of course, if you do go into the history, you can learn about the ongoing power imbalance. I have been reading up on this for about 2 years now and posting about the Palestinian cause during most of that time, because it very quickly becomes clear that there is a giant power imbalance, and that really puts these deaths into perspective because it's out of desperation. Not that that's good or acceptable. None of this is acceptable. We have to stop accepting it. That's kind of the whole point. All right, here we go with, let that dry off a little bit. It's just some good old L'Oreal foundation. I'm not going with like an overly like bleached face. I'm just gonna go with my natural skin tone under all this. So I have shared online a reading list of some of my favorite resources. If you know me on Facebook, you've seen it. I think I made it public as well. If you want to look up Juniper Nichols on Facebook, you can find it. I haven't done a ton of public posts lately because I feel like if you're not in a relationship with someone, it's quite hard to engage in respectful debate, which is why I only want to hear from people I know. If you have questions, I'm not planning to turn on comments, because as much as I'd like to educate everybody, there's so many sources of information around this that it gets very confusing and people get very emotional about what sources they're following and what misinformation is right now. So I've posted the credible sources, the ones that make sense to me, because they form a narrative together that is well researched and is based on people's lived experience, not just nonfiction books, not just YouTube videos, not just podcasts, not just journalism. All of those together with fiction based on lived experience, forms a pretty clear picture to me that this struggle has very deep roots, and it's not about the UN creating Israel as some sort of compensation for the Holocaust. That is an element, but that's not why it was founded. Zionism has deeper roots than that, and it was intended to get Jewish people out of Europe because Europeans didn't want them there. So they're like, well, where can they go? So Zionism was initially based on the idea of solving the quote-unquote Jewish problem of all this ethno-nationalism was going around Europe, and borders were being drawn up again based on perceived differences in ethnicity. And they wanted the Jewish people to go back to the Holy Land so they could hopefully trigger the second coming like in the Bible. And this line of thinking persists in some Zionist circles today. All right, so we've got a base here. I think I am going to try and go with the black band now. This is a makeup palette that I got from one of my students. It's a nice sweet goodbye gift. It happens to be Corpse Bride themed. And the black is called Freedom. How could I not use that at a time like this? Let's try it out. Brand new, fresh, Halloween-y palette. Okay. do I get you on my face? I'm gonna try out this flat brush. I am not particularly good at makeup, so this will be interesting. This is a good test run. Okay. This is going to take a while to get down a nice dark layer. Hello, unibrow. So this is an Irish war goddess, and that is actually quite relevant to what's happening in Palestine. So that night that I woke up and couldn't stop thinking and couldn't fall back asleep for like 5 or 6 hours, I just started researching some seemingly random stuff. I had been looking at my family tree just for funsies, and I saw this line, the Love family line. So Love is a surname that goes back in my family and has made it into my own name. That's my middle name is Love. And people assume it's because I have hippie parents, which I do. But it is a family name, and interestingly enough, the roots are what are called Scotch-Irish in America. And I hadn't realized that before. I hadn't really looked into that. But as soon as I saw that word Scotch-Irish, Scots-Irish, I had deep suspicions that that didn't really mean when someone from Scotland and someone from Ireland love each other very much. And that suspicion was correct. So they're only called Scots-Irish in the States, I think, because they wanted to distinguish themselves from other Irish people. There was a lot of discrimination against Irish people in the potato famine, when so many poor people started arriving. So the Scots-Irish came over as settlers much earlier than that. There's some of they're marked as pioneers in my family tree in the Carolinas, North and South Carolinas, where the Loves are from in my particular family line. So in Ireland, they're called Ulster Scots, because these were actually settlers in the early 1600s when James VI of Scotland / James I of England decided that he would solve a couple problems in his mind. He would anglicize and civilize Ireland by giving away land in the northern area called Ulster to settlers, create a plantation. It's called the Ulster Plantation. This is exactly the same time that my English ancestors were colonizing Virginia and creating plantations. The same kind of companies were funding this. And this policy of giving away land, well, resettling it with a very intentional mix of English and lowland Scottish people who swore loyalty of some sort, and excluding the Irish, the native Irish, the Catholics. Notice that there is going to be a very strong theme of Catholics versus Protestants when you talk about the Troubles in more recent Irish history. This goes back to the delineation between the Protestant settlers from lowland Scotland and England and the Catholic native Irish. So this was a bit of a revelation for me, was like, you know, I didn't really know very much about the Troubles. And what little I knew was, I thought, oh, it's Protestants versus Catholics. That must be based on, like, they're still not over the Reformation. They can't get along with their, you know, different faith. And the same thing happens when we assume that this is a holy war in the Middle East that is based on religious differences. And I don't think that's the case. It's about who has the right to basic human decency, the right to own property, the right to just like exist as a normal person in everyday life. So in Ulster, the town Derry / Londonderry was founded. And if you know anything about the Troubles, you know that this is like a focal point of all the like violence. And the plantation of Ulster created those like neighborhood by neighborhood divisions. They weren't supposed to rent to Irish tenants, and the areas where the Irish were allowed, they paid double for worse land. And yeah, that didn't sit well, obviously. They were not allowed to pass down their property to their kids if they, you know, did have some land. And they were supposed to be basically like the problem would solve itself within a generation because of that policy. Now, I am a beginner in this history, so I'm sure there's a lot of detail and nuance here, but at its basis, this is a settler colonial project, and it was very much intended to change the composition of Ireland and stamp out resistance. It is intended to dispossess the Irish from that area, which had been an area of the greatest resistance to the crown for a while. All right, let's get in somewhere. Ooh. So what do you do when you've got this settler colonial situation? When do you stop resisting dispossession? You wouldn't think that something 400 years ago would have such, you know, intense ramifications, would you? You'd think that over time tensions might die down, that people would blend. But that's the thing, they weren't really allowed to blend. There was still discrimination against Catholics up into the 20th century, and they became inspired by the civil rights movement in the US to start protesting and saying, okay, we want, you know, housing, we want equitable chances at housing, we want equitable chances at employment, we want to be treated like other citizens. So there was a feeling that they were second-class citizens in their own land. And that sounds familiar to a lot of people struggling for liberation today. I'll fix that later. Next, I am going to try out this loose powder, which is a chrome, I don't know what you'd call it, a shifting color powder called Space Dust from Body Effects. I have never worked with a mixing liquid before. This is called Morrigan Makeup Mixing Liquid. I bought this from Body FX, which is a New Zealand company. We'll just see how this goes. Put a little bit in this bowl here. So I learned that one of the Morrigan's colors is black, but there's also a sort of greeny black that is associated with the underworld, or the other world rather. The other world is a term that was used a lot in the pagan school videos, because it's not quite the same thing as the underworld. All right, let's see how this mixes up. I had already chosen this sort of black iridescence because of birds, and I wanted to have something sort of colorful amid all this black. So it was interesting that the color turned out to be kind of appropriate. Oh, what am I going to paint you on with? Let's try it. Mixy, mixy. So it really feels like there's not much we can do sometimes, right? Like, what can you do about settler colonialism? Can you just give the land back? Maybe in some cases. Once you have generations that have been born there, they feel like, well, yeah, this is mine because I was born here too. But when there's exclusion, when there's ongoing exclusion that's unresolved, and in some cases extremely severe exclusion, and I think that is very much the case for the Palestinians, where there are multiple classes of citizen, and based on the color of your passport that you're given, you have different rights to travel. But this is like kind of a tokenism thing, where they're like, oh, look, we have like this or that person in our parliament or what have you. But that does not mean that there is a really fair representational government when a lot of the people can't vote for people that can't vote at all in cases. They are not allowed to travel in or out of the country, or sometimes in and out of like their very small region. Gaza, of course, is all boxed in. And there's millions of refugees in the diaspora who are not allowed to go back to their homeland at all. So the right of return is one of the big deals that Palestinians have been asking for decades. Whereas any Jew in the world has the right to come to Israel and, get citizenship, get land. So they have more land rights than many of the people who were born there. Okay, let's see how this color looks. It's a little chunky. Let's see how it goes on. Interesting. Ooh. I think my brush was kind of loaded with that mixing liquid. I'm perfectly happy for this to be a messy look, because this is a messy situation. And if I am crying while I perform, I would not be surprised at all. This is just so fucking tragic. So many emotions right now. And I have a feeling that the music will bring it out, and the energy in the room will bring it out. And yeah, there's lyrics in the music I'm using about genocide, and I picked that because we need to be direct, and that is the energy of the Morrigan. Is she is very direct. She takes no bullshit, and she doesn't mince words. She acts. She inspires action. She has a vision for how things can change, and she inspires those who can work on making it happening. That should be the point of deities, right? Interesting. That is quite bird-like. But I'm gonna have to watch out for this mixing liquid getting into my eyes. It stings. So I know many feel that posting on social media isn't going to do much to help anybody. So what's the point? Well, solidarity is something that matters very much, even if you feel like you're mostly powerless, if you've already donated, if you've already marched, if you've already called your representatives, if you've been emailing them every day. These are actions we can do, and it may not feel like it matters. It took my representative, I think, a couple weeks to answer my first email. And of course, it was a disappointing response about Israel's right to defend itself. But I don't know how you can call this defense at this point. Mass murder is not a defense. And you cannot answer atrocities by committing more atrocities. So using direct language is one of the things we can do. We can call it what it is. We can call it genocide. We can call it war crimes. We can call our leaders complicit in those things, because this is against everything the UN was formed to do. The UN has become toothless because some of the great powers have vetoes, and the US has continually vetoed any sort of accountability for Israel that goes against international law. There's been no accountability, so their actions just get more and more blatant. And I'm not saying that all Israelis agree with this. They obviously don't. Even though there's this much grief right now for good reason, for very good reason. People have lost lives. They've lost families. Some of those people were peace activists. So it doesn't feel fair. Nothing is fair here. But the killing has to stop. And you can't call for, oh, well, Hamas has to stop firing rockets before we stop bombarding Gaza. The cycle of violence has to be interrupted, and sometimes the people who are most affected don't have the clearest judgment, and they need to be held in check by their friends. I'm going to move on to lips. More body effects. I usually use a semi-permanent lipstick, but I wanted black. So I'm just going to try it out. Definitely patchy, but whatever. And again, I'm fine with this being messy, because war and death are super messed up. Definitely messy. Probably not good enough for now. So back to Ireland. So after the plantation in 1609, there was a big uprising in 1641 where the Irish came in and started killing the settlers. And of course, this raised a huge alarm back in Scotland and England. There was one particular atrocity where 100 captives were taken to a bridge and they were forced to jump off into the river, and those who tried to swim to safety were shot. So this was reported as a huge atrocity, and of course it was. And this was used to drum up support in Scotland and England for a huge invasion. This is the same time that the monarchy was being overthrown by Cromwell. Cromwell's quite famous for that, but still, one of the headlines in his bio is the slaughter of the Irish people as a response to these atrocities. It's estimated between 15 and 50% of Irish people lost their lives in this retribution. 100 people died in that river, but how many thousands died in response? It's not a numbers game. You can't look at how many thousands die on each side and call it even. We just can't do that anymore. Yes, it's how war has worked. The powerful slaughter, the powerless, not the completely powerless, but those with less power, they get killed. And we will have learned nothing from the world wars of the past if we don't heed the international laws that were formed to prevent these kinds of disasters, the accountability between countries, where you can't just use your power to kill as many people as you like in response to whatever it might be. All right, I am going to experiment with putting some of this space dust on my lips. Just see how that goes. Makes a very pretty shade of my palm from purple to green. Ooh. Cool. I think I'll do that on the day. Let's see how this smears just loose. Maybe the mixing powder is not a real necessity. Okay. So, in modern Irish history, you know the song Bloody Sunday, Sunday, Bloody Sunday by U2. That's about protesters, peaceful protesters, marching for their civil rights, being shot by, police or I'm trying to remember if it was Irish police at that point or the English who came in to supposedly help calm things down. It was probably the Irish police, but I'd have to look that up. Again, I am a beginner in this, so I might make some mistakes. But overall, people lose their faith in peaceful modes of protest if they are killed in the street for doing so. And this, again, has parallels in Palestine and Israel. Peaceful protest has happened again and again, but when they are met with bullets and people lose their lives, they lose faith in peaceful protests. It doesn't mean they stop, but it's been proven again and again that the international media won't cover that, and they wait for, Israel to be attacked before it will really receive wide coverage. So we have to amplify the signal among each other, among our network of friends, people who might be persuadable to diversify their sources of information, to do their own research and share sources that aren't just reporting without verifying. And we have had a communications blackout from Gaza for the past several days, so we can't even see their side of the story anymore. Who knows what's going to show up when the internet is restored and if anybody has any batteries in their cell phone. I have no idea what situation is going to be like this coming weekend when I do this performance. It's not going to be good. We can count on that. We have to speak up. All right, I'm going to move on to the next step of this look. So the cheek piercings. I don't know if I'm going to actually be able to simulate this. My first stupid idea was to use these powerful little magnets. But they can't go high enough up to be right because I have too much cheek tissue there. Like it would work here. But it's extremely stupid to put more than one magnet in your mouth, as I would need to do to get this symmetry. Because, as anyone with a child knows, magnets are extremely hazardous. If you swallow them, they can pinch your intestines together and you need surgery. So don't use magnets in your mouth. What I am going to try is these edible bling. So this is, what you would see on cupcakes or something. And I'm going to attempt to glue them to my face with eyelash glue. First, I need to get out some alcohol. Okay, I have some rubbing alcohol on a Q-tip here. Just find something. So I do have natural dimples, but this seems like it's actually too low because when I'm not smiling, it's way down here. So let's try a little higher up. I'm just going to remove there. Let's get another dip. Try and create a clean surface for this eyelash glue to go. This may spectacularly fail. We'll see. Next, I got a couple of these guys. So a tutorial I saw recommended these tiny little body jewelry pieces that have like a little hole here that you can fill with eyelash glue. I don't have that. So we'll see what happens when I stick eyelash glue on this little round ball. So I'm gonna let that dry a bit so it can get tacky. So in the last couple days, Israel has authorized the use of live ammunition against protesters, crowds, probably whoever they want, because let's be honest, that's already been happening. It's not just about Gaza, this is happening across Israel and the West Bank. All year, there have been what has been termed pogroms Israelis, like some Israelis, were even starting to use that term for what was happening with settler violence in these villages. They were being raided. Palestinian villages were being raided by those who wanted their territory, or they wanted retribution for, a Palestinian maybe coming into their community and killing somebody. That does happen. But you have to look like past. It's been like incident. So it's very tempting to think of this as a tit for tat situation, which it is sometimes. It is sometimes just about that blind rage. When someone has lost a person, they go kill somebody else. But the loss of life has always been extremely disproportional. Every year, way more Palestinians lose their lives to this kind of violence. And sometimes it's, the IDF itself, the people who are clearly just there to protect Israelis, not Palestinians. And a lot of these people who lose their lives are kids. Maybe the kid threw a stone, maybe they look suspicious. There are thousands of prisoners, those who didn't lose their lives to a bullet, can be taken in and held in administrative detention without charge, without trial, for as long as the authorities feel like it. There isn't accountability. There is no safety. There is no way you can behave that will make you safe in a state with state-sanctioned violence. So you can't act right. There's no peaceful way to be. There's no peaceful way to exist and know that you will be safe. All right, let's see if this thing will stick anywhere besides my fingers. Okay, interesting. I don't know if this is going to be worth it. Looks a little silly, but I'll wait for the glue to dry to transparency and see how it is. A little bit lighter on the glue for this one. I know that a both sides narrative is very tempting, and yes, there is irrational, violent behavior from both sides. But when one side has the tanks and the extremely powerful missiles, the aircraft support from the US, which is the real heavyweight that has prevented any sort of accountability over the last 75 years. When one side has rocks and, homemade missiles and whatever they can grab, and the other side is one of the most powerful militaries and militarized police forces in the world, it's not really both sides. One side has all the power. So until you fix that power imbalance and give human rights across the board, freedom to travel, freedom to own property without, the constant uncertainty of it being arbitrarily taken away, without due process and a fair, speedy trial, people are going to resist. And I'm sure if peaceful methods work, then that's what they'll choose. But you have to create a climate where it works. And if it's not working, people will turn to anything. They need to feel some sort of agency in their lives. So that's why extremism happens. This understanding why this happens isn't the same as supporting it. It isn't the same as condoning it. It means that I understand where it comes from because I have done the reading and I've listened to people on the ground saying what their experiences are like. And we have to be careful of who we see as credible, who we choose to believe. And I know that in this age of AI, I'm so concerned that we are going to have even fewer, we're not going to have a shared reality. We already kind of don't have a shared reality ever since, Trump's whole fake news thing. He succeeded in undermining belief in mainstream media. But now that we have tools that can create images that we're going to have less and less of an ability to verify, we are going to just splinter into separate spheres of reality where we don't have anything in common. If we don't have information in common, if we can't even start a conversation knowing that we have some, touch points of information, shared information that we believe, we can't get anywhere. So yes, use critical thinking, but you have to believe something. You have to believe in something. These aren't going to work, are they? So, what is the point of a goddess of war? In the Irish context, war was kind of different. It was mostly cattle raids. It was about your own sovereignty. It was about your own domain. It was about basic resources to live. It was not this total war where you try and wipe out most of a population. The definition of genocide doesn't mean that there are no more of those people left. It means an intentional effort to reduce that population or to relocate them out of your perceived space. So genocide and war are not the same thing. That's why we have conventions that we've agreed on internationally. That's why we've defined genocide, including the forcible relocation of people, stated intent to reduce the size of a population, dehumanizing language, calling people animals, barbarians, inhumane, inhuman even. And this kind of incitement language has been used by Netanyahu and other ministers in this government that Israelis were already protesting as way too far right. But, when people are in grief, they are going to get behind these kinds of narratives and they are going to act out in horrifying ways. Civilians are being armed with rifles, and Arabs who are nowhere near the, sites of conflict are being targeted, they're being fired, they're being harassed. And this is what happens when you create this language of exclusion and this culture of exclusion, when you don't intermingle the people. And yes, of course, this land has been fought over for millennia, but it's not a holy war. And previous empires that conquered that area did not force the people who are already there to, have these completely separate, walled off lives where they can't access the basics, where they don't have a future, where they don't have agency over their own lives. So, of course, I can't say what a solution is, but I can say that human rights and freedom are essential to safety. You cannot wall off a people and expect to be safe. Walls don't create safety. They just further entrench the division that caused the insecurity in the first place. All right, I've talked for a while, and I am willing to talk to my friends about this. So if we are friends, you can message me, you can email me, you can text me, whatever line of communication works for you. If you want to discuss this, I will engage in good faith discussions, and I am open. I need to be open to changing my mind about things, because that's how we make progress. But I'm not, this didn't come out of nowhere. This came out of a couple years of really engaging with this topic. So I will try to transmit what I know, and I will try to receive what you know, and hopefully we can create some sort of communication, because severing lines of communication is not going to lead to anything peaceful. I will, of course, not accept toxicity, ad hominem attacks. There are constructive ways to try and figure out where we differ and where that comes from, and to have some sort of empathy for another's viewpoint. I know this is one of the hardest areas to talk about and to maintain that empathy. And in this protest dance, I'm not going out to blame people. I'm talking about genocide as something that I am complicit in, because it's my government and I am to a degree responsible for what they do. I am responsible for staying engaged. Even though I can't control the actions of my representatives, I can stay engaged with this fight. All right. Here's to Samhain, the Morrigan's month. And here's to the safety of each other. Here's to fighting the good fight, for keeping an open mind and keeping your voices raised.